It's World War II time. Buckle up. It all started when Adolf Hitler invaded Poland in 1939 because he's mean, and the Soviet Union was a bandwagoner, so they invaded Poland too. The US was all, we ain't touching that, because Germany was kinda scary and fighting France, Britain, and then most of Europe. Hitler oversized his army and thought he could waltz down the Soviet Union's alley. Wrong friggin' alley. The US was biffles with Britain, so they were backing them up, but were still quote-unquote neutral. The Lend-Lease Act was passed, which allowed the US to sell equipment to Allied powers. FDR said it was like lending a garden hose to a next-door neighbor whose house was on fire. In the 1930s, Japan was being irksome to Manchuria and China while trying to conquer Asia. The US thought Japan was entering enemy territory, so they stopped selling oil and steel to them. Japan got pissed but was too scared to do anything. On December 7, 1941, Japan made a horrid decision to lead an air raid naval attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the U.S. naval base. It killed a lot of Americans, and FDR called it a date that will live in infamy. The U.S. declared war on Japan, followed by Germany's declaration of war on America. America, Britain, and the Soviet Union had a strategy called Defeat Hitler First. America had most of their military resources sent to help Europe first. The American military used a strategy to seize islands near Japan in order to use them as bases to place attacks on Japan. By making these bases, the Allies' forces could cut off Japanese supplies by submarine warfare. The Axis strategy started by trying to defeat the Soviet Union quickly and use a bombing campaign to force Britain out of the war before America came too strong. After Pearl Harbor, Japan invaded the Philippines and Indonesia and planned to invade both Australia and Hawaii. Japan hoped that America would take Japanese predominance in Southeast Asia and Pacific rather than conduct a bloody and costly war to reverse Japanese gains.
Battles. There were some mad turning points in this war, such as in North Africa. German forces said they were going to take over Egypt and the Suez Canal, but they were defeated by the British. After this happening, Hitler could not take over the Middle East. Over in the Europe area, Stalingrad, a little less than half of the German army was killed or captured in the long battle of the Russian city of Stalingrad. This pissed Hitler off because he couldn't take over the Soviet Union's oil field. The craziest battle of them all. American and Allied troops sent from Eisenhower landed in German territory. Although Germany killed a lot of American men, the landing was overall a pretty good day. Hitler started to get a little scared.
Yeah.
Then the Battle of Midway came around. Somehow American naval forces gave a butt-kicking to the huge Japanese and took over Midway Island. This happening kept Japan from taking over Hawaii. Then Americans started doing some stuff called island hopping, getting America closer to Japan.
Go.
Battle of Midway! Oh my god!
Don't hit him.
I want to hit him this time. No, I missed.
Due to American strategy, island hopping, Iwo Jima and Okinawa brought American forces closer than ever to Japan. But both of these battles cost America a ton of troops. During these battles, the Japanese soldiers would have rather commit suicide than surrender. Then the atomic bomb came along, facing many fears of American and plus Japanese casualties. American forces were able to invade Japan. Then President Truman ordered an atomic bomb on Japanese cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This was so powerful that Japan surrendered. Tens and thousands of people were killed in the Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Beep.
These are the top secret files in World War II. Minorities in World War II included two minority groups, which were the Tuskegee Airmen African Americans, and the Nisei regiments, who were soldiers, Asian Americans, both of which earned a high number of decorations. African Americans were also relocated to cities to work in war plants, and they were segregated from white soldiers, and they were not allowed to fight in combat. Soldiers used communication codes of the Navajos, which were not oral written, because the Japs could not figure out what they were saying. The Geneva Convention helped the prisoners of war. It tried to set rules for all countries to abide by for fair treatment of war prisoners.
Even those rules were set, the Bataan Death March was a forcible transfer by the Imperial Japanese Army of 76,000 American and Filipino prisoners of war after 3 months. The Battle of Bataan, POWs suffered brutal treatments by Japs after surrendering Filipinos. Japs were known as kamikazes because they would commit suicide bombings rather than being captured. Even though all of these men suffered, the prisoners of Europe closely followed the rules set by the Geneva Convention. Some human resources in World War II is that there was an increase of women in the workforce because the men were off to war.
We use campaigns like women saying, "Do the jobs you left behind, apply U.S. employment service." Rosie the Riveter was a big symbol for women. Economic things were business change from peacetime to wartime production. Instead of cars, they made tanks. Also, income tax was used for war funds. The military resources they used were the draft was used to recruit soldiers even though they may have not approved.
Boom, 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 boom. This just in. Hitler has killed himself, and the systematic and purposeful destruction of a racial, political, religious, or cultural group, aka genocide, is over. Germany's final solution to exterminate all Jews has come to a halt. All Nazi leaders have been convicted of gruesome war crimes against Jews, Poles, Slavs, Gypsies, and undesirables, the homosexual, and mentally ill. Each man learned he is responsible for his individual action during a war, regardless of orders received. The final result is a demand for final Jewish homeland, and that is your World War II news.
Everyone feared or hated Japanese Americans. There was belief that Japanese Americans were aiding Japan.
Due to the fact that Japanese Americans were believed to be aiding the Japanese, they were all relocated to internment camps. This affected the populations of Japanese Americans along the West Coast, and eventually the Supreme Court didn't allow the U.S. government to do this. A public apology was then issued, and financial payments were made to the survivors.
Rick.